Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for August 14th, 2020. And with all the debate that's been raging over defunding police, I thought this was a really good opportunity to talk about other government agencies, massive ones that really do need defunding, or at very least some huge reductions in the amount of spending. For example, today we're going to talk about the Pentagon. So on this episode, I'm going to briefly talk about the latest National Defense Authorization Act for 2021, an attempt to make a pretty small cut in the amount of spending in that was easily defeated in the Imperial House of Representatives, and some warnings from James Madison, John Dickinson, and John Taylor of Caroline. First of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. You can find our show homepage at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out. 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. That's where you're going to find all of the previous episodes, show links where I've got articles and other videos for you to reference, read, watch, learn more, and all the platforms are on, all the video platforms and audio-only podcast ones. I just submitted to a few new podcast platforms recently, so hopefully we'll be able to reach you wherever you are. Please feel free to send me recommendations to team@10thamendmentcenter.com or leave it in the comments. I'll check that out a little bit later. Again, the show homepage, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you very much for being here. But I promise to not take up too much of your time since it's Fast Friday. Let's see if I can get this done in about 10 to 15 minutes. And I want to start out with a warning and some wisdom from a great student of history, the so-called father of the Constitution, James Madison. And here he is in the Philadelphia Convention, the summer, June 29th, 1787. He put it this way: "The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny and home. Not most of the time, not once in a while, not depending on which faction is in power, but always." And Madison there was really just reiterating something that was well understood amongst the founders and the old revolutionaries. Here's a kind of a more moderate version of the same thing by John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, writing in Letter Number 9, a series of letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania against the hated Townsend Acts. This was in 1768, I believe he wrote this one. And he had some interesting places where he used italics to emphasize things. And I'll try to highlight that for those of you who are just listening. And he wrote, "The money said to be taken from us for our defense may be employed to our injury." So said and may be employed were both you put in italics, and he's highlighting the fact is that they're going to always tell us that they're defending us. They're always telling us that there's a threat, but oftentimes there really isn't. Or once the threat is gone, then the next people don't want to give up the loot, and they're going to keep going on and on and on, and they're going to employ it to our injury. Dickinson went further. He says, "We may be chained in by a line of fortifications, obligated to pay for the building and maintaining them, and be told that they are for our defense." But as Madison put it a few years later, he says, "They have been always the instruments of tyranny at home." So let's fast forward to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is pending for the year 2021. And hear from Lawrence Vance over at FFF.org. He points out that the Democratic-controlled House and the Republican-controlled Senate each just passed their own version of the NDAA for fiscal year 2021. It's October 1st, 2020 through the end of September next year. The bipartisan votes in the House and Senate, Lawrence writes, it wasn't even close. In the House, it was 295 to 125, and in the Senate was 86 to 14. And over a counterpunch, they say that the NDAA is big, really big, weighing in at $740.5 billion. The NDAA for 2021 casts its gigantic shadow over the military budgets of the next 11 countries combined. And I've covered this a bit in the past, and I haven't verified the number 11 on this one. But in previous years, it has been generally about 7 or 8 countries. China, Russia, and the rest of the so-called potential enemies. The U.S. is spending more than all of them combined. And even if you take away those, they also spend more than the next 140, 144, I think, countries combined as well. So it's not even close. These numbers are unfathomable, and it's not possible to have those kinds of numbers if you're following the Constitution. They also point out that each year's NDAA, again, who wrote this? Charles Pearson over at counterpunch.org. Each year's NDAA excludes the intelligence budget. They're not even counting the intelligence. They're not counting DHS budget or a healthy chunk of the Department of Energy budget devoted to nuclear weapons. If they're nuclear weapons, they're basically trying to obfuscate how much is really being spent. I'll get to that in a little bit. Eric Garris over at antiwar.com last month did a very short news report about how there was a proposal to cut defense spending levels by 10%. And it was a vote of 324 to 93 that the House of Representatives rejected this small cut. Again, if we're comparing to the next 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 countries combined, a 10% cut, even if you think that all of this so-called defending has to be done, setting aside the idea that massive debts, massive taxation, and a military complex around the world isn't defeating the purpose of defending people to keep them supposedly free. Let's set that aside. And you agree with the idea that they have to spend this much in comparison to the rest of the world. There really should be just no debate over the fact that all government agencies could use a 10% haircut at all. Anyways, Eric Garris goes on. He says the amendment did not specify what to cut, only that Congress make across-the-board reductions. The amendment to the 2021 NDAA was offered by a guy named Representative Pocan from Wisconsin. No Republicans voted for the amendment, and Libertarian Justin Amash supported it. So easily defeated 324 to 93. And it reminds me of a warning and some wisdom from this guy, John Taylor of Caroline. This was writing in his book, Tyranny Unmasked of 1822, I believe. And he put it this way: national defense is the usual pretext for the policy of fleecing the people. And of course, if they're not really telling us how much they're spending on national defense, they've got $740 billion here, but maybe they've got more in the Department of Energy or DHS or other areas, they're really kind of scamming us even bigger than what it comes across as. And there was a great article by Bob Higgs or Robert Higgs over at the Independent Institute where he did some research on this. This is years ago, but it certainly applies as far as the process. He wrote this in 2010. He's talking about other agencies that spend money in pursuit of national defense or homeland security. He says the Justice Department and the FBI devotes substantial resources to anti-terrorism. The Department of the Treasury even. They work closely with the Departments of State and Justice and the intelligence community to disrupt targets related to Al-Qaeda. He says much, if not all, of the budget for the Department of State and for international assistance programs ought to be classified as defense-related too. In this case, the money serves to buy off potential enemies and to reward friendly governments who assist U.S. efforts to abate perceived threats. I like that he said perceived there. About $5 billion, Higgs writes, of annual U.S. foreign aid currently takes the form of foreign military financing. So even if it isn't national defense here, they're still spending it on military. We also have the Department of Veterans Affairs, $124 billion at that time. And then we also have to consider interest on public debt because debt keeps racking up. And he points out that it's a little bit more difficult. He says finding out how much of the government's net interest payments on the publicly held national debt ought to be attributed to past debt-funded defense spending requires a considerable amount of calculation. But this is a great Austrian economist, so he was able to put it together. And the estimate was about a 60% increase over the claimed amount that they were spending. There was somewhere in the $600 billion range. But let's say it's only a 50% increase. We're definitely over $1 trillion. And I don't even know if that's counting in CIA black budgets, for example. It's a ton of money. And it's really a huge ripoff, especially when we're talking about the fact that the national debt, the budget deficit, is so incredibly massive. And in a blog that we published yesterday by Mike Meharry, he says the federal government has spent a record 100% more than it has brought in fiscal 2019 with 2 months remaining. 100% more than it takes in. This is unsustainable, and that might be the understatement of the year by me. Mike goes on, he says the yearly budget deficit currently stands at $2.81 trillion. Remember the Tea Party taxed enough already, too much spending, all that stuff when the last guy was in office? Well, that last guy held the record at $1.4 trillion in 2009, along with Bush. And this year, it's being doubled. This is really, really bad stuff. James Madison put it this way in a letter to Henry Lee. April 13th, 1790, I go on the principle that a public debt is a public curse. And he pointed out in a representative government, it's a greater curse than in any other. So there are many ways that in this type of a representative government, that when they have access to creating a giant debt, it's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. And it's pretty obvious that's exactly what's happening, no matter who happens to be in power in Washington. Here's Lawrence Vance back to his article talking about the amount of spending that goes to overseas, other countries, defending other people. And he says, no one's ever asking why. Well, we are, of course, and he does. He says, why should the U.S. Department of Defense, funded by U.S. taxpayers and charged with defending the United States, have security commitments to NATO, Japan, South Korea, international sea lanes, and other areas? Well, certainly not, especially if we're following the advice of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and so many others of the founding generation. And Vance sums it up like this: because the Department of Defense functions as the Department of Offense, it is the Pentagon that needs to be defunded. I agree 100%. And James Madison, of course, I can repeat this one over and over and over. 1795, April, political observations. He put it this way: armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a trifecta easily. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you thought it was interesting. I hope you learned something. That's more important than anything, is that you got something, some piece of information that was useful to you. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me here today. Thank you so much. If you support the show, you can smash the like button. You can get notifications, leave a review on iTunes or elsewhere. And if you really want to pitch in, you can support us financially as well. Do not feel obligated, but if you are able to, I'd be very grateful for any consideration you can give. Our membership program starts out as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. That's 10thAmendmentCenter.com/members. Again, thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.